Welcome to social psychology. Let's start. We have learned about the social affect, and now we proceed to the next one, the self. Specific for this lesson, we will be learning the cognitive aspect of the self, or what we call the self concept, or the thoughts that we hold about ourselves. We will also be tackling about the role of affect, and that is the feeling self, considering self-esteem, or the positive or negative feelings that we have about ourselves. We will also be tackling about the social aspect of the self, including how we present to other people, and the way our thoughts and feelings about ourselves are also determined by our relationship with other people, including the social situation. So to start, let us dig deeper about what is the self and what composes the self. So at the foundation of all human behavior is actually the self, or our sense of personal identity and of who we are as individuals. Because understanding the self is very important and essential, it has also been studied for many years and the most researched topics in social psychology. So, in the field of social psychology, we conceptualize the self using the basic principles of the field, which we have learned from the very start of this course, and that is the relationship with the individual or the person and the people around them, including the social situation, or what we call the person situation interaction. We also define the self or the components of the self, which composes the building blocks of social psychology or the ABCs, and these are affective, behavioral, and cognitive components of the self. Let's first consider the first cognitive aspect of the self, focusing on the self concept. What is the self concept and why it is called the cognitive aspect of the self? So actually, part of what is developing within us when we were young until we grow up is actually the fundamental cognitive part of the self, and it is the self concept, which we define as a knowledge representation that contains knowledge about us, including our beliefs about our personality traits, our physical characteristics, abilities, our values, goals, and roles, as well as the knowledge we have exist as individuals. Or to put it simply, our self concept are the thoughts that we hold about ourselves. So as we grow older throughout childhood and adolescence, the self concept also becomes more abstract and complex and is organized in a variety of different cognitive aspects, which we now call the self schemas. So self-schema again is our organized knowledge about ourselves in a variety of different cognitive aspects. So as we grow older, we have from self-concept, we organize our self-concept into self-schemas. And these are about as we progresses in school, about our appearance, about our skills, in other activities, and many other aspects. And these self-schemas direct and inform our processing of the self-relevant information. But what is the difference between the self-concept and self-schemas? It's very simple. Self-concept is the beliefs we hold to ourselves and the thoughts that we hold to ourselves. And these beliefs are actually called self-schemas or schemas, and they form the mental representation, a more organized one about who we truly are. So self-concept is a more broader umbrella, and what's inside the self-concept is our self-schemas or the beliefs. So that is just how simple it is. And every individual has a different self-concept primarily because they have different beliefs, or what we call different schema about the world. But although each person has a unique self-concept, we can actually identify some characteristics that are common across individuals where they think that is part of our self-concept. And these are the following: physical characteristics, social identity, and personality traits. These are the common component of the self-concept, which is actually across all people have a view about their physical characteristics, has a view about their social identity, has a view about their personality traits, and these beliefs of these three factors created self-schemas. And these are common to all, but their experiences of these three quite be different. And the first component is the physical characteristics. And it is actually an important component of self concept because this is, if you notice, a lot of people, this is how they describe themselves, how they have this understanding about themselves. So, physical characteristics is actually one of the major part of our self concept, and it's actually affect as well how we look at ourselves because we might see ourselves an attractive or attractive. We might view ourselves as either positive or negative ways. And because we understand our characteristics well, no, and we are used to use this to judge ourselves and could be a form of a meter in judging other people as well. Another factor or component of self-concept is social identity, and it reflects our membership in social groups where we belong to and care about. So that is our social identity or our sense of self that involves our membership again in the in certain groups that we belong to. And the third one is the personality traits. So this is the remainder of the self-concept that is normally made up of our specific and stable personality characteristics that describe the individual. So these individual differences are important determinants of our behavior, and this aspect of the self-concept reflects this variation across people because we have different capabilities, we have different proclivities, we have different characteristics and states. So these are also, even if we share, we all have personality traits, we have different way of reflecting them to other people. So moving forward, the self-concept is actually a rich and complex social representation of ourselves. So in addition to our thoughts about who we are right now, self-concept also includes the thoughts about our past self, like our experiences, atong accomplishments, our failures in the past. It could also be about our future self, no, that is part of our self-concept, like our hopes, plans, and goals and possibilities. For example, what we're going to do right after this quarantine. And aside from that, because I've said self-concept is very a complex matter, it also includes not just our past or future, includes our thoughts as well with our relationship with other people. So it is no doubt that part of our self-concept is our thoughts about our family, our close friends that have become part of us. So indeed, if we don't get to see the people who we really care about for a while, we usually say that we naturally feel sad and somehow we miss them because we usually think that we are in essence missing part of ourselves because the people around us, our friends, family, are also in part of our self-concept. They also form who we are, right? And all these factors actually makes self-concept complex. Nevertheless, these individual differences and complexity is what we call self-complexity. And this is about the extent to which how different we are in our ways of thinking. So it's just a very simple description or meaning. Self complexity is how different we are, how complex our self concept in terms of our understanding about ourselves. So some selves are more complex than others, and some selves also have quite few ingredients of self concept. So these individual differences can be important in determining certain psychological outcomes. No? So having a complex self means that we have a lot of different ways of thinking about ourselves. Like for example, in this image, you can see a woman in there whose self-concept is quite complex because it contains her social identities about she is also a student, she's also a girlfriend, she's also a daughter, she's also a psychology major and a tennis player who has encountered a wide variety of life experiences. And in the field of social psychology, we could say that she has a high self-complexity. But there's also other people who perceives themselves solely as student ra gyud siya or solely wife ra gyud siya. No? Kanang wala nagi other factors basta iyang self-concept ba. And this could mean a narrow range of life experiences And we could say that that person has low self complexity. So for those people that actually have high complexity or self complexity, um, various self aspects of the self are separate, and it could add actually to a greater understanding and could buffer even certain negative outcomes of our life if we have high self complexity. And why I am saying this? For one, research has found that compared with people having low self complexity, those people who have high or higher self complexity experience more positive outcomes in life. No, people with more complex self concepts found to have lower stress levels or tend to have lower chances of getting ill, no illness, and they also have a greater tolerance for frustration, and they are more positive and less negative reactions on the events of what they are encountering. So what I believe, certainly because people who have high self complexity also have high or and wider range of experiences. Baso mauna nga our experiences or ilang experiences like this woman in the image here kay naa siya'y mga daghan nga mga mo buffer niya. Like if naay one aspect sa iyang life nga may not be going well, naa siya'y other people. Like example, kung naay something going wrong sa family, naa siya'y friends. No, naa po siya workmates, naa siya'y playmates, no? Naa siya'y boyfriend, no? Or inyang relationship not going well, naa siya'y friends, naa siya'y family, naa siya'y workmates. So these actually add up to our experiences that makes having uh high self complexity rather is actually a good thing. Certainly because they made our experiences or they are made up of our experiences. So importante gid kaayo no nga daghan tag affiliations, daghan tag mga wider ang atong activities and atong we are living our life fully for us to have a more complex self concept that could actually buffer negative emotions which we have discussed from the previous presentation or previous lesson. So moving forward, another way as well of studying self concept aside from self complexity is what we call the self referent effect. So it is actually the understanding na we usually remember things na somehow related sa ato or kanang maka-remember ta if it is relevant to ourselves. So self-referent effect is actually um it's finding that information that is processed in relationship to the self is particularly well remembered if that thing is important to us. Like example, di ba? Like if we want to study for an exam, mas madali tang maka-remember if ka-relate ta sa exam than those nga di ta ka-relate. So our self-concept is very kuan kanang gi-organize magad siya through self-schemas, right? And in ways for us to bring that memory or information from our self-schema, better way of bringing them out is through the self-referent effect or reference effect or the way how we try to be more engaging in situation we find relatable, how we tend to recall things if it is more relevant to us. So that is another way of studying as well the self concept. So moving forward, like any other schema, the self concept can vary in its current cognitive accessibility. So if you remember cognitive accessibility, it's the information that our cognitive aspect is more likely present all the time, no, being accessible, unsay permi available to us. So self-awareness is actually more like it, no nga. If our self-concept is very accessible, or we tend to access our self-concept more, and that means accessing our thoughts, beliefs about ourselves, we become more self-aware, or we gain this idea about an awareness about ourselves. So we define self-awareness as the extent to which we are currently fixing our attention to our own self-concept, and that is accessing our thoughts and our beliefs towards ourselves. But self-awareness is actually a very good idea. However, when self-awareness gone wrong, meaning na over ang self-awareness, it could lead to another phenomenon. And this is actually when our self-concept becomes highly, overly accessible. Nga we are very self-aware to the point nga we feel that we tend to be feeling nato no nga we tend to be observed by other people, or we tend to feel that we are being potentially judged by others. We experience a public induced self-awareness, and that is being self-conscious. No, so what's the difference between self-awareness and self-consciousness? Is when you are self-aware, it's more internal, no? Like you're focusing your attention to yourself, being self-aware. But when you are self-consciousness, or when you are self-conscious rather, uh, your awareness is towards public, outward. So mauna nga you begin to be more kanang meticulous of what's going outside. So again, self-awareness is inward, self-consciousness is towards the other people or outside. So just like your experiences siguro, and I'm pretty sure you would remember this, when your self-awareness are so heightened or increased that you become self-conscious. For instance, no, na when you are preparing for a report in class, no, or presentation in class, you perhaps remember you are painfully aware that everyone was actually looking at you. And it could be when you did something in the public, no, like napakong ka, na-slide ka, nalamba ka, and then you feel embarrassed, no? Because you think everyone is already looking at you and perhaps potentially judging you, whether it is um, explicitly or in their minds, no? So that is self-consciousness. I'd like to emphasize that not all aspects of our self-concept are equally accessible at all times. So dili always, all the time, ang person self-aware. So that's also the reason why naatay differences sa atong accessibility, sa ato ang self-schemas, and this could also create personal differences. Kay other people are very aware sa ilang kaugalingon, and other people that are not so quite aware sa ilang kaugalingon. And this may mean that other people are very conscious about their physical appearance, while others tend to they don't mind that. So nagitay differences about cognitive accessibility that makes everyone quite different, because other people makes it a big deal because it is being more accessible sila huna-huna, well other people would say they don't mind, no, kever, no, kay because it's something that they don't want to fix their attention on, because for them it doesn't matter, because somehow our cognitive accessibility could also include manggod our concerns and our self-interest kung asa ta towards dito. So mao sad na atong kasagaran gina-focus. On the other end, as well, no, in the field of social psychology, there's also an increase in self-awareness study, because it is something that is important in the influence of our behavior, because when we are self-aware, na may changes atong behavior and how we deal with other people. However, there's also cases wherein people lose their self-awareness and become more likely to violate acceptable social norms. For example, like in during riot, no? Rally raon tato niya, nagrayot na pagkahuman, no? Because they lose their self-awareness. And for example, in this kanang mga kasagaran makita nato kanang naay magmask, no, ikarali dili makita, anonymous kay ilang identity, no, they engage in behaviors nga very kanang dangerous, very antisocial, because somehow they hide in their identities. And kasagaran nila kanang mga kuan kanang mga terorista, no, kay ka mga terorista kana magmask, no. I'm not saying ang rally ha kay kuan ha, but naay mga cases wherein magrayot magmask, no, and then ika-mask nila kay murag kuay gihadlukan gyud ba, because they lose their self identity. For one, because they are not being identified in the public, kay di man maklaro labi nang magmask sila. Aside from that, they see that other people are doing it, so their sense of identity is being mixed with a crowd, and we call this phenomena as De-individuation. For example, I have here an image below, kani. So when we speak of de-individuation, no, this is actually a loss of self-awareness and the individual accountability in groups. Like in this image, no, when people are in large crowds, such as mass demonstration or riot, they may become so much part of the group and may lose their individual self-awareness, and then they mix with the crowd. So maunang na ay mga may bung na lang kano nga labi nang naay mag-riot, mag-wild kay ang mga tao because somehow ang self-awareness ba and then our identity is mixed with the crowd, and that is somehow what we call a social phenomena of the individuation. And perhaps you have experienced that, no? Nang grabe kay mo pa party-party, you feel that everyone is so hyped na wild na kay ka because also everyone is so hyped, no? So na de-individuate na ka party-party. Pag next day, hibong na ka nag-inato di ay ko, no? Because you have lost your self-awareness and mixed with others. So that is the individuation. So speaking of self-awareness, there's actually particularly two types of individual differences in self awareness. And these could be about self concern or other concern. So, when we speak about self concern, it is more like a private self consciousness towards the self, private. If it's more on other concern, it is towards the public, or that is what we call public self consciousness. So, let's define the two terms. When we speak of public self consciousness, it actually refers to our tendency to introspect our inner thoughts in feelings. So just like the image in here. So when we are private self-conscious, we try to understand, reflect on ourselves, how are we doing? How are we feeling? Are we still feeling okay? Feeling good about ourselves? It is more like the in totality about our own conscious understanding about who we are. And public self-consciousness is the opposite to private, self-consciousness, because public is towards others. And we define public consciousness in a way that it refers to our tendency to focus on our outer public image and to be particularly aware of the extent to which we are meeting the standards set by other people or by others. So, like the image in here, if we are very drawn to public self consciousness, sometimes we lose our sense of self. That's the reason why if we have too much of public self-consciousness, we might be the puppets or the clowns of the society. Like we're always driven about how many likes we receive in social media, the reactions that people give to us that somehow define our self or sense of self, which can be very damaging and critical. Or like this image here, no? So this could be driven by public self-consciousness, like how if you are given 10,000 likes, 20,000 comments, 1,000 share, I will do this. So if we are always driven by intense high public self-consciousness, we might lose our way in our understanding about who we truly are and just try to please everyone around us. I'm not saying private self-consciousness is much better than public consciousness, but the right blend of both. Why? Because if we are also overly private self-consciousness, we tend to be very critical sa itong kagalingon. No, kay very private, high ka itong private consciousness ba, whatever we do, we judge ourselves. Di man na ma-Vance, no? You are not good enough, Vance, no? Or you should do better. Kay taas makag self-consciousness, kay private self-consciousness because you know unsay makaya nimo ug di mo makaya. So you tend not to try things because you are your own personal critic, so which is not good as well. So dapat enough blend with a private and public. So I'm not saying public is always being drawn to pleasing other people, because public self-consciousness is also needed for us to follow social norms, diba? No jaywalking, or don't throw or keep off the grass, no? Or don't throw your garbage in this area, because that is how we somehow present ourselves and being conscious about the rules and ordinances and regulations in the society. So in particular, the right blend of having private self-consciousness and public self-consciousness is important for our whole self concept. And how do we get that balance? Having the right blend. Uh, I'm very sad to tell you that there is really no sad and fast rules. There's really no hard and fast rules about this one because it is something personal, Mangon. So it's something that you should reflect on what are the enough blend of private and public um, self-consciousness. But perhaps I'm gonna give you some starting points ng siguro, and this would mean that having a healthy private self-consciousness means that from time to time you regulate yourself if what you are doing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling towards yourself and other people is still healthy and it is still making you still in line with the human welfare and dignity. And in public self-consciousness, you have to remind yourself that there is always a demarcation line wherein dira lang kakutob so that you won't always please other people, that it's okay to say no to certain things which is part of you don't like. Okay, it's always not also healthy to be always driven by what the society or other people always expects from you. So overall, our private and public self-consciousness is important, and we should keep our self-consciousness for us to avoid the individuation. The individuation is losing our sense of self. So having the enough blend of this two is important again for our self-concept.